Welcome. In this demo, we're going to be doing a brand new clean install of vSphere ESXi version 8.0 on a brand new server. So there's nothing on this server right now. It's got a bootable device and it's got some internal disks that we're going to later be using for vSAN. But let's go ahead and burn this first of all, this ISO image that we've downloaded from VMware over to a USB stick that will then carry into the basement, in my case, where we will boot to this installer. Here we go. Take the ISO image, drag it over here, and in Rufus, simply hit the start button, acknowledging that everything is going to be destroyed on this little USB stick. Doesn't take very long. We'll speed this up at this point. And when we come back, we'll boot to our little Supermicro server that we have down in the basement. That was pretty fast. We'll be right back. So the host is booting at this point, and we want to enter the boot menu. So we're going to hit the F11 on the little virtual keyboard that we are getting from a remote console. As soon as that starts, the ESXi installer will launch and we'll begin the process. Now, one of our goals for this particular installation of ESXi is to enable a secure boot using a TPM chip that is installed in this physical server. So let's go ahead and move down here to the UEFI boot from this little USB stick that we put ESXi on and watch the installation start. Well, at this point, it's identified the physical server. It's showing me that we're installing ESXi version 8.0.0. It shows us the build number. This is the initial availability release of vSphere 8. It's showing me this, the physical model of our server, that we've got a Xeon D2146 CPU running at 2.3 gigahertz, and that we've got approximately 128 gigs of RAM. Okay, so we're ready to do the installation. ESXi has booted and is ready to proceed, but it's warning us here to double check VMware's hardware compatibility list to ensure that our physical server is compatible with the version of ESXi that we're about to install. Okay, it gives us the URL for the hardware compatibility list. It's really important that you actually check this when it comes to production systems. If you're working in your home lab, that's not to say that if your server is not on this list, that it won't work. It's just saying that it may not be supported by VMware. Okay, let's go ahead and hit enter to continue and accept the end user license agreement with the F11 key. And it at this point is going to look for devices for which or on which that we can install ESXi here. So there's a bunch of different devices. You can see here that I've got a Supermicro SSD that's approximately it's really about 32 gigs. This is actually a SATA DOM device plugged directly into a SATA slot, and it's perfect for installing ESXi. Okay, it's actually the minimum recommended size for installing ESXi is right around 32 gigs. Now these other devices we're later going to use for vSAN. So we don't want to install ESXi on these. Here we've got a cache disk. Here we've got these four 2 terabyte SSDs. And here's our device that we booted to. Now there's been some discussion around USB installation and booting a host from USB. It's really not a good idea to do this. USB devices tend over time to degrade and have not been reliable, and so VMware's guidance is not to do installation on USB. Hence the reason that I'm using this SATA DOM device. Okay, VMware has also said that ESXi version 8.0.0 will be the last version to actually support booting from USB. So we're going to install on this SATA DOM device, this 32 gig SATA DOM device. Okay, it's warning us that the data will be on this device will be overwritten. We'll hit enter. We'll choose the language now at this point, and it's asking us now to choose a root password. Okay, if we hit the enter key, it's telling us, nope, we really do have to choose something at least 7 characters long. So let me move over here. I'll type in a nice password. It's not a bad idea at this point to make the root password identical on all of your servers. We're later going to use vCenter to manage these, and so if you want, you can enable lockdown mode so this root account will not be accessible remotely. Okay, it's warning us that we're doing the installation on this Supermicro device. Let's hit the F11 key and let it continue to install ESXi version 8. Okay, it's warning us now to remove the installation media before rebooting. Okay, and we'll hit the enter key, we'll reboot, and we'll do the initial configuration when we come back of ESXi. All right, it looks like ESXi is up and running, and it's time at this point to begin to manage this server. And we should look at a couple of different things. We need to do a little bit of initial configuration. First of all, it tells us to manage the host, go to, and it gives us the host name, and it gives us an IP address both for IPv4 and IPv6 that are obtained via DHCP. It's really important that these IP addresses not change. Now you can add a DHCP reservation at this point, but it's probably a better idea just to go ahead and set a static IP address for your management network. So let's go ahead and come in, we'll hit the F2 key, and we'll do some initial configuration. It's going to ask us to log in with the password for the root account that we had just set. Okay, and let's first of all configure our management network. We'll give it a host name, we'll give it an IP address, we'll give it some other things. Okay, so let's start with the IP configuration. Let's set a static IP address, and in this case I'm going to give it an IP address of 192.168.1.127. The rest of this is just fine. We will disable IPv6, okay, and we'll set the DNS configuration, which actually was obtained from the DHCP server, so that's just fine. Okay, and we can just go ahead and tell it to use that as static, and we'll give it a host name that we like. This is my 5th ESXi host, so we'll call it vsan05, and we'll set the primary suffix, the coopers.lan. Okay, and that's it for this initial config. Since we disabled IPv6, we're going to have to reboot, so let's go ahead and do that now. And then we'll come in and we'll begin to manage this host with the vSphere host client. So we'll just point our browser at its IP address, log in as root, and go from there. All right, ESXi is installed. Let's go ahead and do some of the initial configuration by opening a browser and pointing it to its IP address or fully qualified domain name. Now at this point, you've got to make sure that this IP address is in your DNS server as the machine's fully qualified domain name, and you're ready to go. Well, this is the ESXi host client. Let's log in as root and type in our password and do some of the initial configuration of ESXi. We can have some discussion about the Customer Experience Improvement Program, but one of the things that you should be aware of is that in order to use things like Update Manager or Lifecycle Manager. No, let's try this again. I'm going to go ahead and join the CEIP for this server because there are several services that this CEIP enables, especially online health checks and upgrade compatibility. So let's go ahead and click OK here and note a few things. There haven't been any data stores that have been configured. We might be vulnerable to a couple of security issues here, and we are currently using an evaluation license mode. Now we can come in later license this, but for right now, we're going to go ahead and do some initial configuration around time and maybe even Active Directory if we like. So let's go over here to Manage and set our time servers. That'll do it. We'll click Save. Now that we have time set up, we can come over here if we'd like and activate authentication through Active Directory. So we can join a domain here if we like, and have our domain users able to log in and become root users on ESXi. At this point, that's up to you. But what we really want to do now is enable the wider environment by installing vCenter Server. Right? So in the next demonstration, we'll show you how to install vCenter. Thanks very much. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll talk soon.